Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis.
Megalopolis. It's time to talk about this
Uh-oh.
movie.
Uh-oh.
This movie is 42 years in the making. Director Francis Ford Coppola has been working on this for half of his life. It's really, really astounding to think about it. He had this idea initially in the 70s. He started to make movements on it in the 80s, but just a lot of things just prevented it from ultimately happening. He couldn't get a ton of studio support. Also, the September 11th attacks in New York City happened, and if you've seen this movie or if you know the story of this movie, it's very much rooted in New York City and economies and societies. And so just from a sensitivity standpoint, it didn't really make sense to make the film. And he ultimately kind of became disillusioned. You know, he had a few flops that you know, sort of made their way to big screens in the early and mid 2000s. And so he just wasn't getting a ton of support. But how things change, because ultimately outside of filmmaking, Francis Ford Coppola decided to start a wine company, a very, very successful wine company at that, something that has been hugely successful and profitable for him for about the past 10 years. And he decided to take the money and the earnings from that wine company to fund and make this movie himself. $120 million worth of money went behind this movie, but he still needed distribution. He still needed some sort of studio backing. He didn't get it for a long time, but then he premiered it earlier this year at the Cannes Film Festival. And once he showed it there, ultimately Lionsgate decided to agree to buy the film and give it a theatrical release here in the States. And even more so, it got a pretty wide IMAX theatrical release as well, because a lot of this was shot with IMAX cameras and uses IMAX technology. And so Francis Ford Coppola, one of the greatest to ever do it, decides to step up to the plate one more time to make another film that took, again, 40-something years to make, but it's finally here. People have seen it. It's obviously, I think, one of the most talked about films of the year if you're really into film culture, film Twitter, things of that nature. But we'll get to it and give our thoughts. With all of that out the way, man, I'll pass it to you. What do you think about this brand new film, Megalopolis?
What a story to get a film made, let me tell you. And I think, how many years did you say? 42? Is it 42?
42.
It's so funny that 42 years in the making is it, because it almost feels like it was 42 years in the making. This feels like this film is everything that Francis Ford Coppola was thinking potentially 42 years ago, put kind of into a film. Megalopolis is such an interesting film for all the reasons you just said. The way it was made, the fact that this movie exists, I think is kind of cool and impressive, because it was kind of self-funded, but that's not the only reason. Francis Ford Coppola, like you said, is one of the greatest to ever do it. Again, on the Godfather movies and Apocalypse Now and all these other great things, Dracula. And now here we are in 2024, and he's making this passion project that again has been in the making for so long, funded by himself. But it also feels like the ideas that he had were of somebody so much younger than him. This movie visually is incredibly impressive. I think there's a lot of things here that are really cool to look at. Super cool ideas, really beautiful at times. Very dream. It's a dream world. A lot of these things are dreamy. Some of the ideas are like, whoa, crazy. How did you get here? Though on the flip side, almost all of the ideas that he's talking about here almost feels like a tweet in some ways, or like something that he dreamt about when he was in his late teens or early 20s. And none of those ideas, I think, make it into anything else but an idea. A lot of them don't make sense. A lot of the things that are being said, you question and go, was that profound, or were you just trying to sound smart there? And so you're here, I think a lot of people talk about the dialogue in this film, and when I was listening and watching, I was like, why are y'all talking like this? Like, are you there are moments where they very clearly want you to hear what's being said so you can internalize them, but I don't think they're as big of ideas as Francis Ford Coppola wanted them to be, per se. And so I could probably go on and on about the ideas about this movie, but I think, this movie is a load of fun. It offers no solutions, I think, to any of the problem that it's bringing up, but it's beautiful to look at, and I think you enjoy the weird nature of the way the characters interact with each other, the way the world works, the way the performances some of these actors are turning in are interesting. It's just you'll laugh a lot. You'll think I think things are beautiful a lot when you see it, but I'm not sure that you can bring this movie home as anything super comprehensible. But I love that it exists. I think I love that a filmmaker of this stature was able to bring his own vision to the big screen with what he had. I love the idea behind this movie. Unfortunately, just the ideas that he had within the movie don't work. But wow, what a ride! What actually can't wait to watch it again. It's so weird how interesting it is because I don't think it's a good film at all. But again, it's something about the ideas and the way that this movie looks that's impressive to me, and I really enjoyed those aspects of the film. Francis Ford Coppola is so interesting because we have gotten so many grounded things from him that are iconic. That this thing, being as dreamy as it is, was just like, what is this and what is happening on the screen? But yeah, I can't wait to continue to talk about this movie more to people. I think it'll be a just an interesting conversation to have and see what people think about it. But wow, what a I wouldn't even know if it's an experiment for him, but maybe it is. I don't know, but what an experiment. What an interesting watch.
Francis Ford Coppola, one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, a filmmaker that has made truly profound movies, some of the greatest American cinematic classics ever. It's undebatable. The Godfather Part 2, The Conversation, Apocalypse Now. That's the greatest four-run film stretch, I think, in movie history. It's pretty much untouchable. But he's also made other great films, One from the Heart, and he's done Bram Stoker's Dracula, which are actually more fantastical and more elevated. He's leaned into really dreamy things and things that are definitely not as grounded as some of his other works that are telling these more sweeping stories about America in particular, or even like a biopic he's done. And I think that Megalopolis, knowing that it took so long to make and knowing the story of this movie has just been developing for such a long time. I've been hearing about it for years and years and years now. I was very much excited about this just because the idea that a filmmaker in his 80s has the wherewithal and the capability to just take his own money and say, I'm going to make this because no studio is going to support it. I'm always here for that as just a creative and just the idea of willing something into his existence, especially because you believe in it so much. And that alone is something that's worthwhile championing and celebrating. I said the same thing with Todd Phillips and Joker. He didn't self-fund that, obviously, but it's very much his vision and unapologetically his vision. And sometimes it just doesn't work with people. And in the cases of both of those movies, Megalopolis and Joker Folie à Deux, they just don't work, and that's okay. But I think for me personally, this experience from Megalopolis is just, it's confounding because it's one of the most baffling cinematic theatrical experiences that I've had watching a movie because I'm feeling reactions and feelings that often contradict each other. You know, I'm simultaneously entertained but frustrated. I'm at the same time confused but intrigued. All of those things continue to just juxtapose against each other as I'm watching this movie because it's wildly inconsistent. And I think that that's probably the most frustrating thing about it that's going to enrage fans is just because of how inconsistent it is. There are moments where I'm looking at this on the huge IMAX screen and I'm like, this is just visually stunning. This is absolutely gorgeous. But then there's other sequences where I'm like, this is clearly a backlot with a terrible green screen rendition that's probably compared to some of those recent Marvel picks that we've criticized as well. Like, it doesn't always look great. It's only certain moments and times. And that's the same thing with the dialogue. That's the same thing with the story and the characters and the development of it. Everything at one moment can feel really good and it feels really well executed. And then at the very next scene, you can just watch something and just question it like, yo, what did they just say? Is that a real piece of dialogue in this movie? Who wrote that? There's all these questions, but I think the reason for all of that is because this was just a troubled production. There were so many stories about how this went left and how actors were told to improvise and write their own dialogue, which is just never a good idea. How the art department and the special effects department and the visual effects department walked off set. There's all sorts of stuff out there that you can read about the movie. And when you have that type of environment, I don't care how talented of a filmmaker you are, how great you are, the movie is probably not going to come together all that well. It's going to be a catastrophe. And I think even beyond the ideas and what Francis Ford Coppola is trying to achieve and whether or not he made a good movie, the movie wasn't made from a good place because you had people in open revolt that were against the film for whatever reason. They might have been justified in that respect. And so it's almost hard to judge it in that way, but we have to because it is a final film. It is something that was released. And so we have to take it for what it is. And it just doesn't work. You know, it's just a movie that ultimately doesn't work. But I'm just so appreciative of the fact that there is something out there that can challenge people, that also encourages people to really, really see it in order to formulate an opinion, because there are
Mm-hmm.
people out there that fully support and fully buy into this being like a new cinematic masterpiece. And actually, I'm not even going to argue, because there's so many things I like about it. I'm with you as well. I can't wait to watch it again to really
Yeah.
dissect certain things, because there's certain sequences in the film where there's so much happening on screen that it's hard to digest it all. It's so many things happening. You kind of have to pause or go back and rewind to ultimately see like everything that's being thrown at you, because it is a lot. They stuff a lot into this movie, but I think just from a baseline standard level of what we expect out of filmmaking, a cohesive story, something that's comprehensible and legible and makes sense, and has a beginning, middle and end, and resolves all of the challenges and things that you introduce. This movie just doesn't do a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of things introduced that they never pick back up. There's like a whole riot sequence that happens that we see one time and it's never revisited. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
threads and a lot of things that are just thrown in there, and there's no resolution for them. And it's just like, well, wait a second. Like, if you're putting that in the movie, it should have a purpose, and we should ultimately be
Mm-hmm.
closing that loop. But it doesn't close the loop on a lot of that stuff. And lastly, quickly, the acting performances all over the place. They are absolutely all over the place. It's hard to even gauge and judge them, because I think most of the cast didn't even really know what movie they were in, except Adam Driver, maybe. But he also had like the most gravitas and weight, but also that was out of place at times. Like, it didn't need the
Yep.
amount of gravitas that he brought to it. Sometimes Aubrey Plaza is just like going for it and being
Yep.
absolutely off the wall and ridiculous. And occasionally the film called for it, and other times I'm like, that doesn't even work here. So tonally, we don't even know what to feel. So it's hard to talk about at the end of the day,
It
but I
is.
appreciate it. I kind of liked it. I kind of dug it. I do like some of these bizarre, insane things that get made for the amount of money that they're made for. I'm kind of impressed by that this was able to do what it did. And I respect it. I respect it at the end of the day. It doesn't make me love him any less as a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately appreciate his work and his art. But you do just want, I think, for somebody who is 85 years old, when you question like, well, how many movies does he have left in his life? Like, if we're lucky,
Ooh.
1, 2, maybe. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
want something to be better at the end of
Yeah.
their career, as opposed to, I think, something that's just so divisive and
Mm-hmm.
hated by a lot of people, at the same time. But that's not the case here, and he hasn't really made a good film in quite a long time.
It's been a minute.
Which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. It's just a good story. I think at the end of the day that he was able to realize his vision and ultimately bring it to pass, and allow a lot of people to see it. But it's bombing. Megalopolis is what people are calling
Megalopolis.
it. It's only made about $10 million domestically at the box
Damn.
office. I mean, I don't know if it ever was in any reality that it could have made more than that, because like Francis Ford Coppola is not a
Damn.
relevant director anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
this doesn't have a huge studio behind it, a huge marketing campaign behind it in the traditional sense. I don't know. Are you surprised by that? What do you think that says just about like these big, bold, original ideas that have like somewhat of a loud drumbeat around them just kind of fail again so spectacularly, especially I think in this day and age when we you hear a lot of people that clamor for new original stories, and they want new things, and they don't want the sequelitis that we're just so accustomed to getting. Well, here's an example, although it's probably not good for a lot of people. Here's an
Right.
example of a big movie that people just don't show up and support for whatever reason.
Yeah, that man, that's probably so much to say about that. I think I'm not surprised that it didn't make that much money. I just expected a little bit more than 10 million. Off of what 110 million dollar budget. I was like, dang, you couldn't give us 20, you know what I'm saying? Sheesh. This movie went through the ringer, but he did it with his own money, right? Like, it's not like some studio is like going through it right now. It's like, oh shoot, I made this thing and now I'm kind of I'm kind of going through it myself. But so interesting, man. And what I even find interesting about Megalopolis, I think probably both of our shows, since we both seen this in IMAX, the theater was like always packed. And I imagined it was nothing but like dudes in there. This is nothing but like film bro movie goers that kind of went to go see this film, and I don't think the movie appealed to anybody outside of that. If I mean, there's really nothing about it unless you're engaged in that story of Francis Ford Coppola that'll make you kind of want to go see this film. Unless you're like I have to see every Adam Driver movie, which I don't know anybody that's like that per se either. Unless you're like I don't see the reason. So I think it does make sense that it didn't make that much money. Somebody could have watched the trailer and be like, I have not seen anybody say, "Oh my god, I can't wait to go see that," unless they are again part of like Film Bro dude that environment. And so man, who knows in what other world Megalopolis would have succeeded, but it sure isn't this one. I think I do think it makes sense that it wasn't successful. And I'm curious to see if Francis Ford Coppola does anything else, what it will look like, and will it make more than 10 mil? Like, you know, we gotta do better than that, boy. We gotta.
Yeah, there's no wide appeal to this at all. And I mean, the trailer and the marketing themselves don't even tell you what the film is about. It's a pretty confusing thing when you just look at it. If you haven't heard a thing about Megalopolis, like 98% of the audience, and you just show up for I don't know, a Marvel movie or something like that, or Inside Out 2, and you see a Megalopolis trailer, it doesn't tell you what it's about and entices you to stay home as opposed to go see the movie, which I think that's just what a lot of people did. That's just that was probably always the destined fate of it. They tried to do something really spicy with the marketing that ultimately backfired. You know, they had the whole AI generated trailer with the fake responses and fake reviews, and I don't know who came up with that. Probably not the most sound idea, because they ultimately had to take it down, and person probably lost their job because of that. So they tried to do something there, but there's not really too many ways to make this something that a lot of people would want to go see, as opposed to just people that are just cinephiles and into film and are on Letterboxd or on Film Twitter. Like that's the audience right there, and that's a small audience. It's a very, very small minority, and that's ultimately what represented the makeup and the outgoing of this film. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the brand new Francis Ford Coppola pick, Megalopolis. If you've checked this out, and I doubt you have, hit us up and let us know what you think.